The exact moment Karen severed the internet line behind my shed, two things happened at once. A low rumble echoed across the sky as an unmarked military drone swooped overhead, and inside my reinforced garden structure, a screen flashed red with a message I hoped I'd never see. Connection to Pentagon secure feed lost. Initiating security protocol. I watched in frozen silence as my cameras picked up her smug little face, snipping the thick fiber line with a pair of garden shears and tossing it into her ridiculous pink tote bag like she'd just done the world a favor. She had no idea she'd just committed a federal offense on par with jamming a secure line during wartime. And the kicker? She did it because she thought the cable was ugly. That's right. Ugly. Let me back up. I live in a pretty average suburb, cookie-cutter houses, decent schools, and unfortunately, an HOA run by a woman who thinks she's a cross between Martha Stewart and a Cold War dictator. Karen. No last name. Just Karen. She insists on it as if Madam President would be too formal and hey, you maniac, too casual. She's known for measuring lawn heights with a ruler, issuing violation letters for mailboxes being too matte, and once tried to write up an elderly couple for having excessively decorative wind chimes. The woman is a menace wrapped in a pantsuit and wielding a clipboard like a weapon. Now, I'm not your average suburbanite. I work from home, but my home office isn't just a desk and a coffee mug that says, World's Okayest Programmer. I'm a contractor for a branch of the Department of Defense. Think satellites, encrypted comms, and signal routing too sensitive for anything short of a hardened, dedicated line. I run one of the Pentagon's secondary signal relays, buried beneath my garden shed in a secure, climate-controlled room with military-grade shielding. Totally legal, permitted, and authorized. But definitely not something you want Karen sniffing around. Which is why the cable was encased, routed discreetly, and marked with warning labels in 5 languages. Of course, Karen doesn't believe in labels, or laws, or logic. The week before this all went down, Karen had started complaining about unauthorized wires during her neighborhood patrols. That's what she calls walking around with binoculars and snapping photos like she's trying to catch a raccoon violating curfew. I'd gotten 3 notices taped to my front door, each one in Comic Sans, accusing me of creating an eyesore with visible equipment. One of them even had a photo of the cable, which I'm pretty sure she had to crawl into my side yard bush to get. I didn't respond because there's no arguing with crazy, and also because I assumed she'd eventually find something new to obsess over, like bird feeders or pinecone arrangement. I should have known better. That Friday, I was on a conference call with a Pentagon comms director, reviewing satellite calibration updates. The feed was clean. The encryption held. Everything was running smooth, until it wasn't. A sharp beep pierced the room, followed by total silence. My screen blinked once, then twice, then went black. I stared at it in disbelief. Then came the alert. Secure link compromised. Not failed. Not disrupted. Compromised. I bolted out to the shed, heart pounding, already imagining worst-case scenarios. A fault in the satellite dish, a hacker breach, maybe even a raccoon with a death wish. What I didn't expect was to pull up the security cam footage and see Karen's bleach-blonde head bobbing around my backyard, holding shears like she was auditioning for an over 40 reboot of Edward Scissorhands. She knelt, examined the line, then casually snipped it in one clean motion. I actually heard her say, "This'll teach him to ignore my notices," right before she turned and strutted off like she'd just won a battle no one else was fighting. My first instinct was to laugh. My second was to check the emergency relay system. No signal. No backup. Nothing. That line was active. It wasn't just part of the job, it was the job. Cutting it wasn't like pulling a plug. It was like yanking a heart monitor off a patient mid-surgery. And now the Pentagon thought we'd been compromised. I didn't have to call anyone. They called me. A scrambled phone line lit up in my pocket. I answered with the code phrase. The voice on the other end was cold and clipped. Feed lost. Are you secure? Negative. Line was physically severed. Unintentional breach by civilian. Visual confirmation obtained. Backup inbound. ETA 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That's how long I had before the quiet little cul-de-sac turned into a federal lockdown. I ran to my driveway just as the first neighbor peeked out from behind her curtains. The distant hum of engines got louder. Then came the black SUVs, 3 of them, plus a tan Humvee with no plates and what looked like a drone antenna sticking out of the top. They didn't even slow down. Just pulled straight up on my lawn and started unloading gear. Karen appeared from around the corner holding a smoothie and a flyer for the upcoming HOA wellness mixer. She stopped dead in her tracks as 2 agents approached, flashing badges and asking her to step aside. Her smile faltered. The flyer fluttered to the ground. "I'm the HOA president," she said, voice rising. "This is highly irregular. Ma'am, you're going to need to stand over there. I demand to know what's going on." I stepped forward, now flanked by 2 armed agents, and said as calmly as I could, "Karen, remember that cable you cut?" Her eyes narrowed. "The illegal wire cluttering the neighborhood?" "Yeah," I said, pointing toward the shed. "It was part of a classified communications relay linked directly to the Department of Defense. You didn't just cut a cable. You compromised national security." Karen blinked. Once, twice. Then she actually laughed. "Oh please. Like anyone would run something that important through a backyard shed." The agent next to me leaned in and said flatly, "Ma'am, you just interfered with a federal signal. That's a felony offense punishable by up to 20 years in prison." I swear she paled so fast her fake tan flaked. As the agents began cordoning off the area, another black SUV pulled up. A man in a suit stepped out holding a sleek tablet. On the screen was a live video feed of a high-ranking official at the Pentagon. "Confirming visual," the man said into his earpiece. "Yes, sir. Civilian interference verified. Containment protocols initiated." Karen looked from him to me, to the squadron of tactical personnel setting up a secure perimeter, to the neighbors now openly filming her from their porches. Then, finally, she whispered, "I just thought it was an ugly cable. And that, dear Reddit, is the story of how my HOA president accidentally triggered a federal incident because she couldn't mind her own business. But oh, we're only getting started." Karen stood on the edge of my driveway, arms folded, as if her sheer willpower could push back the federal agents circling her like sharks. Her lips were pursed so tight they nearly disappeared into her face. One of the agents politely but firmly asked her to step aside again. She didn't move. Instead, she threw her head back and barked, "I am the president of this HOA, and I demand to know what jurisdiction you think you have here." That was when Agent Reyes, a no-nonsense woman in tactical black, stepped forward holding a sleek black folder that could probably get her into NORAD. Without a word, she opened it, revealing her federal ID and a letter stamped with the Department of Defense seal. Karen stared at it, blinking, her lips twitching like she couldn't decide whether to scream or faint. The agent calmly replied, "Ma'am, this property is a licensed civilian infrastructure site for secure federal communication. You've committed a felony by tampering with it. We have full jurisdiction and immediate operational authority." Karen blinked again. She clearly wasn't used to anyone telling her no, much less with government backing and armed backup. She sputtered something unintelligible, then tried to pivot the conversation by pointing at me and declaring, "He never filed any community compliance forms. He's been violating HOA aesthetics policy for months." As if that would override national security. That's when Agent Monroe, a towering man built like a refrigerator with the face of someone who hadn't smiled since 1992, approached her and said in a slow, deliberate tone, "Ma'am, we're going to need you to sit down over here. We have a few questions." Karen still tried to bluff, saying she had legal immunity as an elected community officer, which earned her a raised eyebrow and a long stare from Monroe, who simply repeated, "Sit down." Dave, Karen's eternally silent husband, came trudging out of their house in a bathrobe and socks, half asleep and holding a cup of decaf. He took one look at the armed men setting up a secure relay post in our backyard and visibly deflated. I don't think he'd even been told what Karen had done yet. That was about to change. Within minutes, folding tables were set up. Laptop stations deployed. My shed had turned into a federal node. A drone launched from a nearby van and hovered silently overhead. Karen and Dave were separated, each seated in collapsible chairs in front of agents asking very pointed questions. Dave looked like a man regretting every life choice that had led to this exact moment. Karen, meanwhile, launched into a theatrical monologue about neighborhood safety and how the mystery cable posed a fire risk. She claimed she thought I was running an illegal surveillance system, and she was just trying to protect the community. The agents let her talk, occasionally taking notes, but their faces never changed. No amusement, no sympathy, just quiet calculation. A few feet away, I was brought over to a terminal where a real-time feed had resumed with Pentagon oversight. A high-ranking colonel I recognized from previous briefings stared out from the monitor, his eyes stern. He didn't waste time. Was the breach contained? I nodded and confirmed Karen's act was caught on camera, no further damage. Good. Local charges will be supported by federal recommendations. We are logging this as a verified sabotage attempt until further review. That word, sabotage, hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. I glanced back at Karen, who was now visibly sweating despite the shade. By that point, neighbors had started gathering in droves. The suburban code of blinds and curtains had officially been abandoned. Phones were out. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Karen, the iron-fisted HOA queen, was now under federal investigation, and people were loving it. Some even brought lawn chairs. Someone passed me a lemonade. I think it was Brenda from Lot 6. She leaned over and whispered, "So what exactly did she cut?" I leaned in, keeping my voice low. "A live Pentagon uplink cable. You know, minor stuff." Her eyes widened so dramatically I thought they might pop out. Meanwhile, Karen tried a new tactic. She insisted she'd been warning the community about me for months. That I was suspicious, and had too many electronics, and had declined to attend the last 4 HOA potlucks. That apparently qualified me as a domestic threat. One of the agents asked her if she had any actual evidence. She pulled out a stack of printed HOA complaints from her tote bag. Agent Monroe flipped through them and muttered, "You filed a violation for Halloween lights being too bright?" Karen nodded vigorously. They were disturbing the balance of the evening aesthetic. Then came the moment where the situation shifted from hilarious to serious. Agent Reyes quietly said to her team, "Run her name through the shared database. Flag for any previous incidents." It took less than a minute. A younger agent looked up from his screen and said, "We have something." She was a person of interest in a 2017 complaint filed by a community in Oregon. Misappropriation of HOA funds, abuse of power, minor surveillance violation, never followed through. My head turned so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. Karen froze when they brought it up. "That was all dropped," she said quickly. "Misunderstood. Political." She tried to laugh it off. The agents didn't laugh. One of them asked, "Did you also think that wire was a political problem?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. At that point, the commanding agent turned to me and asked if I had further documentation of Karen's behavior. Oh, I did. I had camera footage, photos of her violating property lines, audio logs of her threatening to fine people over window tints, even a time-stamped clip of her measuring my grass with a ruler while muttering about non-regulation fertilizer. I handed it over. They uploaded everything. You could see the slow burn in her face as her imagined authority disintegrated in real time. Then, from down the street, an older neighbor named Mr. Franklin walked over holding something in his hand. "I found this last year after she left our board meeting in a hurry," he said, handing it to Agent Reyes. It was a flash drive. She plugged it in. What we saw next blew the entire neighborhood wide open. The drive contained documents, emails, spreadsheets, proof that Karen had been running a private HOA fund off the books, collecting nuisance fees, and depositing them into a personal account labeled Community Aesthetic Fund. There were even emails detailing how she used part of that money to buy herself a home wellness spa kit, a $900 outdoor grill, and luxury yoga mat. The agents looked stunned. I actually heard one mutter, "Well, that escalated." Karen tried to snatch the drive back, screaming something about confidential community business. Dave finally spoke up then. "Karen, stop. Just stop." That silence after he said it? You could have bottled it. It was the sound of 20 years of passive silence finally cracking. With all that mounting evidence, the agents conferred briefly, then moved to secure her phone, her HOA laptop, and access to her personal computer. A soft protest came from her lips, but it died quickly. She was starting to realize this was no longer her kingdom. This was a war tribunal, and she'd just confessed to her own treason. And the worst part? This was only the beginning. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long orange streaks across the suburban rooftops, Karen's entire illusion of power had been reduced to a neat stack of evidence files on a folding table and a very quiet husband who suddenly found great interest in his shoelaces. The federal agents were far from done. With Karen's lies now fully exposed and the neighborhood practically hosting a block party around her downfall, things took an unexpected and much darker turn when Agent Reyes handed me a printed summary pulled from Karen's confiscated laptop. I stared at it, confused for a moment, then looked up at her. "You're saying she recorded people?" I asked. Reyes gave a tight nod and said, "More than that. She had surveillance files, audio and video, multiple addresses. Some of them contain metadata that shows timestamps going back at least 2 years. Hidden mics in community mailboxes, backyard motion cams, even a wireless mic that appears to have been used during HOA meetings." I blinked. "That's nuts." Agent Monroe muttered, "No, that's felony wiretapping." He handed over another report, this one showing a digital trail leading from Karen's devices to cloud storage accounts under fake names. Apparently, the HOA president had a little side hustle, using illegally obtained recordings to intimidate residents into compliance. Files were labeled things like timlawnargument.wave and nancyfencecomplaint.mp4, most of them accompanied by notes suggesting she used them to either shame or manipulate people at board meetings. Things escalated quickly after that. One of the agents brought out a portable scanner and ran it across the walls of Karen's house while she sat on her front steps in complete silence, her once smug expression now replaced with the hollow look of someone watching her kingdom get condemned brick by brick. Every 5 seconds or so, the scanner beeped. The team found 2 hidden microphones in her office, a camera behind a faux air vent, and a thumb-sized device planted under her kitchen table, right below where her HOA board usually gathered during meetings. She'd been bugging her own allies. But the bombshell came when they accessed her cloud archive and found a file labeled VIP Watch. Inside was a collection of data she shouldn't have had access to, screenshots of personal documents belonging to a resident who worked as a diplomat, email headers with government agency tags, even an audio recording that referenced classified travel route. My stomach dropped. Karen had somehow stumbled onto something way above her clearance level and had been hoarding it like gossip at a hair salon. I looked to Reyes, who was already on a secure line. "We need to notify counterintel. We may have a diplomatic breach." Within minutes, things went from neighborhood soap opera to national security alert. The agents shifted tone. Additional personnel arrived in a nondescript white van. What looked like a decryption specialist got to work on Karen's encrypted folders, and when he cracked one labeled HOA board only, he froze. She was copying neighbor Wi-Fi signals, he muttered, routing them through her system, filtering keywords. "What kind of keywords?" I asked. "Security terms. Like contractor, clearance, surveillance, Pentagon, he said. Looks like she was eavesdropping and logging anything she thought was suspicious or exploitable. That's when it clicked for me. Karen had noticed something odd about my setup months ago. She didn't know what it was, but it gnawed at her. She couldn't access the shed directly, so she started snooping in the only way she could, digitally. My firewalls had held, but neighborhood traffic wasn't so lucky. Her obsession with HOA control had slowly twisted into full-blown paranoia. And somehow, in her eyes, I had become her white whale. I thought she just didn't like the cable. Turns out she thought she was preventing a national scandal. Then came the most unexpected turn of all. The younger agent sifting through the financial logs flagged a series of PayPal payments made to a sketchy business name, ClearZone Property Security. No record of this company existed anywhere official, but further inspection revealed that Karen had been paying them for consulting on HOA security strategy, yet the payments were irregular and heavily encrypted. Monroe frowned, muttered something under his breath, and asked, "You ever heard of local HOA chapters being approached by shell security contractors?" I shook my head. Then it hit me. What if Karen wasn't just paranoid, but someone had fed her paranoia? What if this mysterious company was coaching her to gather certain types of intel? Reyes confirmed the suspicion an hour later. The company was flagged in a previous DHS sting. Suspected of recruiting locals to help track officials or government employees in exchange for favors or money. They operated through front companies, especially in neighborhoods with government-connected residents. She might not have known who they were, but they knew who she was. Karen wasn't just a nosy control freak anymore. She was now a potential asset, willing or not, in a low-grade intelligence operation. A pawn who thought she was playing queen. When they told her, she didn't deny it. She just looked at them, wide-eyed, and said, "They told me it was for neighborhood safety." Her voice cracked. "They said I could keep tabs on anything suspicious. I thought I was helping. I was protecting the community." It was the first time she sounded genuinely scared. Dave, still silent but now visibly shaking, muttered, "Karen, what the hell did you get us into?" The answer was clear, way too deep. That night, Karen was detained pending formal charges: tampering with federal infrastructure, illegal surveillance, financial fraud, and now possible cooperation with foreign or illicit intelligence operations. She didn't cry. She didn't fight. She just walked calmly into the SUV, flanked by agents, clipboard nowhere in sight. The neighborhood, on the other hand, erupted in whispered chaos. People had known Karen was nosy. They'd suspected she was shady. But no one thought she was installing spy cams or working with shadowy shell companies. The very same woman who once fined a resident for painting their garage door eggshell white instead of approved antique ivory had been unknowingly playing house with real espionage. By the end of the night, Monroe returned to my shed with a solemn look. "You're going to get a new relay," he said. "Higher grade. Full cloak protocol. DoD's upgrading your system. You're now designated a red zone. Karen's little mess flagged this whole area." He handed me a silver envelope, my formal commendation. It felt surreal. One day, I'm mowing the lawn and checking for package deliveries. The next I'm getting thanked by federal agents for maintaining one of the cleanest operational nodes in my sector. But even as the SUVs rolled away, something lingered in the air. That Karen had been so obsessed with control that she spiraled into surveillance, possibly spurred on by people she didn't even understand. It made me wonder how many other Karens were out there, listening in on conversations they had no business hearing, thinking they were doing the right thing. One thing was for sure: Karen wouldn't be running the HOA anymore. And based on what was still hidden in those files, the fallout had only just begun. By Monday morning, the news vans had arrived. They parked at the front of the neighborhood like vultures circling a fresh carcass. Reporters stood at the edge of the cul-de-sac, holding microphones and looking confused about whether this was a story about espionage or just the world's most dysfunctional homeowners association. Honestly, it was both. Karen's name was already trending on local social media, and the headline that seemed to get the most traction read, HOA President Cuts Pentagon Line, Uncovers Spy Scandal in Quiet Suburb. A ridiculous sentence by any measure, but the truth was even stranger. I tried to keep a low profile, but it was impossible. A few outlets found out my name through public records and started trying to shove cameras in my face. I gave a single statement. All I ever wanted was a quiet place to work and decent internet. Then I went back inside, locked the gate, and let the rest of the neighborhood soak in the madness. It was poetic justice watching Karen's reign implode from the comfort of my home office while sipping coffee from a mug that said, "World's Quietest Hero." The actual legal process kicked into high gear faster than I expected. The charges stacked up like a grocery receipt after payday. Tampering with federal communications infrastructure was just the appetizer. The real meat came with the surveillance violations, the HOA embezzlement, and the newly uncovered evidence of her correspondence with the shell security firm. Apparently, those emails contained phrases like recon priority and target behavior flags, which didn't sound like the kind of thing a regular community president should be writing unless she thought she was starring in her own spy thriller. The prosecutors weren't amused. Karen was arraigned by Wednesday. She showed up in court with her hair deflated, makeup smudged, and a public defender who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the walk from the car to the building. I watched the footage online. She tried to maintain her composure, claiming she was just trying to protect her neighborhood, but the judge didn't even let her finish. Bail was denied on account of her being a flight risk, and the courtroom erupted into murmurs when the assistant U.S. attorney mentioned the words, potential foreign intelligence compromise. Back in the neighborhood, the rest of the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from her. 4 out of 5 board members immediately resigned. The fifth, a guy named Frank who barely attended meetings and only joined for the free pizza, was suddenly elevated to acting president by default. The look on his face was that of a man who had just been handed the nuclear football and told to babysit it until someone smarter showed up. To his credit, Frank held an emergency community meeting in his driveway that Friday. Half the neighborhood showed up, still buzzing from the recent chaos, and when Frank sheepishly asked if anyone wanted to take over the HOA, no one raised their hand. For once, silence was bliss. But the highlight of that meeting wasn't the resignation parade. It was when a federal courier showed up mid-discussion and handed me a padded envelope. Inside was a letter of thanks from the Department of Defense and a certificate I'll probably frame out of sheer irony. But even better was the small note attached to the back. We've added extra eyes to your block. Quiet ones. You'll be in good hands. I wasn't sure if that meant we now had federal surveillance as part of the neighborhood watch or if someone had just installed a few satellites with a better angle. Either way, I slept easier that night. The court proceedings dragged on for weeks, but Karen's story kept evolving. In the courtroom, she went through several phases: denial, deflection, victimhood, and finally, conspiracy. Her lawyers tried arguing that she had been manipulated by a shadowy group and had no idea what she was doing. The problem was the recordings. The agents had over a dozen audio files of her, not only talking about residents but strategizing how to use what she learned to control elections, pressure people into voting her policies, and in one file, she bragged about how no one can challenge me because I know everything that happens before it does. That clip played on the evening news. Twice. Even her husband Dave ended up testifying. His quiet nature finally broke in court when he admitted that Karen had become obsessed. She stopped sleeping, he said on the stand. She kept journals, maps, data charts. She'd listened to our neighbors' conversations through her phone at night and mark timestamp. She really thought she was saving everyone. The courtroom was silent after that. What Dave described wasn't just illegal. It was delusional. And the more she spiraled, the more the jurors saw that this wasn't just a petty HOA drama. It was a full psychological breakdown wrapped in national security consequences. The icing on the cake came when a second whistleblower, one of the former HOA treasurers, came forward and turned over additional documentation showing that Karen had forged multiple board signatures over the years. She'd been approving her own expenditures, fabricating votes, and even blocked at least 3 attempts to change the bylaws by losing the paperwork. The judge didn't hold back. She declared Karen's entire tenure as HOA president as a textbook case of unchecked authority turned systemic abuse. Back in the neighborhood, life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of it. Without Karen at the helm, the HOA basically dissolved. Frank turned in the office keys and resigned officially by placing a note in the old HOA mailbox that read, "Good luck, everyone." Nobody argued. The clubhouse, which Karen had used as her unofficial throne room, was repurposed into a community co-op. Someone donated couches. A retired Marine who lived on the corner brought in his old grill, and it quickly became a regular spot for Saturday barbecues. The HOA's old meeting table was used as firewood at the first gathering, which felt oddly ceremonial. As for me, the Pentagon sent contractors to upgrade my system. New fiber lines were laid under the yard, shielded from tampering. The shed got a reinforced door and a biometric lock. They even installed a small, silent drone dock disguised as a birdhouse on the roof. I asked if that was necessary. One of the techs smiled and said, "After what happened here? You're a flagship example now." And then, in the quiet moments, there was Karen's letter. It came from county jail. Handwritten. 3 pages long. The tone was erratic, part apology, part conspiracy theory, part plea for forgiveness. She said she had been misled, manipulated, and ultimately thrown under the bus by people who promised her community control in exchange for compliance. She blamed her behavior on a mix of loneliness, paranoia, and a desperate desire to matter. It was sad in a way, tragic even, but I couldn't risk responding. I turned the letter over to the agents handling her case. They scanned it, thanked me, and I never heard anything more about it. The last I saw of Karen was on the evening news, being led into a federal courthouse in shackles. No clipboard, no sunglasses, just a woman who flew too close to the power lines and never realized they were live. It was a strange feeling walking outside without glancing over my shoulder to see if Karen was lurking behind a bush, clipboard in hand, measuring tape dangling from her wrist like a warning sign. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. Quiet in the way it was meant to be. No more surprise violations. No more gossip-laced threats disguised as community memos. Just the hum of lawnmowers, the occasional bark of a dog, and the sound of kids riding bikes on the sidewalks without being scolded for aggressive cycling. In Karen's absence, the neighborhood had finally started to breathe again. The co-op that replaced the HOA building was now the social hub. Families who once avoided community events started showing up with crockpots and folding chairs. People talked again. Not whispered, talked. One neighbor even built a small free library and stocked it with books on gardening, DIY home repair, and one oddly specific title about how to spot a neighborhood narcissist. It was clearly a reference to Karen, but nobody said it out loud. We didn't have to. 2 weeks after the sentencing, a box arrived at my front door. No return address. Inside was a sleek package stamped with a government seal and a handwritten note on crisp stationery. It simply read, "For continued support in operational integrity. From those who watched and now watch with you." Beneath the note was a polished drone controller, a lightweight interface tablet, and a pair of discrete surveillance nodes small enough to fit behind a bird feeder. I wasn't sure if it was a gift or a polite reminder that I was still under the federal umbrella, but either way, I appreciated the nod. They'd even included a small plaque that read, "Civilian Asset, Tier Bravo." It didn't mean anything official, but it looked impressive on my office shelf next to the totally fake Employee of the Month trophy I'd bought for myself after surviving Karen's last email tirade. The biggest surprise came at the next neighborhood gathering, when someone brought up the old HOA's finances. The audit had finally come through. Karen's hidden accounts had been liquidated by court order, and the funds, nearly $160,000 in improperly collected fees and falsified fines, were being redistributed to residents. Everyone was getting a payout, with priority going to those she'd targeted the most. A man named Howard, who Karen once tried to evict over a rogue tomato garden, received a check large enough to install a greenhouse. Brenda from Lot 6 used her refund to take a long-overdue vacation to Aruba. And me? I donated half to the co-op and used the rest to install a backup satellite dish with encrypted failsafe. I figured it was poetic. But perhaps the most satisfying part was what became of Karen's house. With both her and Dave out of the picture, him having filed for separation and moved to Idaho, it went up for auction. The winning bid came from an unexpected source. A retired Special Forces instructor who'd grown tired of city life and wanted a quieter place to settle. The neighborhood welcomed him with open arms. On his first weekend, he held a barbecue and joked that anyone trying to spy on him better have night vision goggles and a solid health plan. We all laughed a little too hard. Still, the shadow Karen cast didn't vanish overnight. People remained wary of anyone mentioning community rules or forming new committees. Frank, who'd briefly inherited the HOA position, was regularly offered free meals and beers out of sheer sympathy. The trauma of having someone use bureaucracy as a weapon left a mark. But over time, that caution turned into empowerment. Residents started organizing informal task groups. Maintenance volunteers, gardening crews, holiday decorators, all free of enforcement and drama. It was amazing how productive people could be when they weren't being threatened with fines over unsanctioned rees. One quiet evening, I was walking my dog past the old HOA building when I saw two teenagers playing catch in front of it. One of them threw the ball too hard, and it hit a leftover sign that read, "Community Conduct Committee." It fell with a satisfying clatter. The kids froze, waiting to be scolded. I just smiled and gave them a thumbs up. They laughed and kept playing. That was the neighborhood I always hoped to live in. One where people made space for mistakes and chose cooperation over control. It was around then that I received a formal invitation to a federal debriefing in D.C. Not mandatory, but strongly encouraged. I went more out of curiosity than anything else. They housed me in a secure facility just outside Arlington, walked me through what they'd uncovered from Karen's devices, and showed me a diagram linking several other HOAs across the country with similar shady security consultants. Karen hadn't been the only one, just the first to be caught with such a spectacular level of incompetence. They asked if I'd consider consulting on civilian surveillance patterns, how to detect them, prevent infiltration, and report them through proper channels. It was tempting, but I declined. I told them I'd rather be the guy sipping coffee on his porch with a clear signal than the one buried in bureaucratic red tape. They respected that. Before I left, one of the officials gave me a small box and said it was a parting gift. Inside was a pin. It had a satellite embossed in gold, a tiny red dot where the relay line used to run through my backyard, and the words, "Eyes open, mouth shut," engraved beneath. I wasn't sure if it was a motto or a warning, but I pinned it to my bag anyway. When I got home, everything felt lighter. The air, the quiet, the absence of Karen's constant hovering presence. The neighborhood had finally found its rhythm again. Kids played until the porch lights came on. Dogs barked without fear of HOA letters. Weeds popped up in driveways, and no one rushed to report them. We had gone from a tightly wound, fear-driven cluster of houses to an actual community. All it took was one cable, one snip, and one woman who thought she was in charge of everything and ended up the subject of a federal case file. The last time I saw any sign of Karen was a headline buried deep in a legal blog. She had been sentenced. 7 years, with possible parole in 5, depending on behavior. The court declared her a danger to others only in the bureaucratic sense, but still enough to warrant confinement. No mention of remorse. Just a quote from the judge. Unchecked control in the hands of the self-righteous is often more dangerous than chaos. Sometimes I still get letters from neighbors thanking me, as if I had orchestrated this whole thing. I didn't. All I did was mind my own business and let the truth do the rest. But the next time someone says one person can't change anything in a neighborhood, I'll point to the shed in my backyard, the drone disguised as a birdhouse, and the echo of a woman who once said, "That wire is an eyesore." Turns out, it wasn't just a wire. It was the thread that unraveled everything.